Hey there. Ready to dive in? We got a lot of questions about this one, about young people and their mental health. People sent in excerpts from The Anxious Generation, this book by Jonathan Haidt, and it gets right to the point. We're going to talk about, well, smartphones, of course, but also like how important playing is, especially outside, and this whole thing about keeping kids safe, maybe too safe.
And what I find so interesting is how Haidt doesn't just lay out the problems. Like, he really digs into the why using psychology and sociology, even a little bit of, evolution. Plus, he actually offers solutions.
Right. Okay, so for this deep dive, our goal is to kind of break down what Haidt is saying and highlight some of the really striking points he makes. But I got to ask you about this Mars analogy. Right at the beginning, he compares raising kids now to, being the first parents on Mars. That's a pretty intense comparison.
It is, but it's powerful, What he's getting at is how different things are. Going from kids who played all the time to kids on their phones, it's a huge shift, like leaving Earth. It's like we're raising them in a place their brains weren't built for.
So we're taking these, Earth-ready brains and just dropping them on Mars with no spacesuits or anything.
Exactly. And like those astronauts, Gen Z is facing these totally new challenges. Think about it. For forever, kids learn how to be social, take risks, bounce back from stuff, all through real life interactions, playing outside, being on their own sometimes.
Right, boarding forts, getting into, scrapes with their friends, all that. But now it's less about exploring the real world and more about this online world, which comes with, well, its own dangers.
Totally. That virtual world, it's all comparing yourself to others, seeing these perfect feeds, these algorithms that keep you hooked. It's like the landscape is always changing, the rules are fuzzy, and the stakes feel really high.
And Haidt, he lays out these stats about mental health issues, anxiety and depression, especially in young people. Those graphs are pretty scary.
No denying the data. Around 2012, when smartphones really took off, teen depression, especially in girls, just shoots up. Not a slow climb, but boom.
And he's careful to say it's not just kids being more open about their feelings or self-diagnosing. He looks at hospital visits, even suicides, and it's all going the same way, up.
Right. This is more than just people being aware. It's a real increase, and it's happening while childhood itself is changing drastically.
So we have this, what Haidt calls the great rewiring of childhood, and this mental health crisis, all at the same time. But how are they connected?
Well, he points to a few key factors, and they all link back to this shift away from play-based childhoods. Less free play, more safety concerns, the whole impact of social media, and the draw of video games. It's like all these things hitting at once.
Okay, let's break those down one by one. I rember being outside for hours, just messing around with friends. Seems like kids now don't have that freedom.
Yeah, Haidt argues that free play, especially being outdoors, it's crucial for kids to grow up healthy. That's how they learn to take risks, handle their emotions, deal with others, be resilient.
And he uses this term, anti-fragility, to show how actually facing challenges makes kids stronger.
Exactly. He compares overprotected kids to those trees in Biosphere 2. Remember that experiment? They tried making this closed-off ecosystem. The trees kept falling over because they'd never had to deal with wind. They were fragile, not anti-fragile.
So, we're raising a generation of, bonsai trees, all pretty and protected, but, snap in a real storm.
That's a good way to put it. And it's not just physical stuff, but emotional, too. If kids are shielded from everything uncomfortable or hard, they won't know how to cope when life gets tough, which it inevitably does.
He also talks about safetyism. This idea that we have to protect kids from every type of harm, physical and emotional. He's saying it's gone too far.
Absolutely. Keeping kids safe is important, but Haidt's point is that too much protection is backfiring, making kids more anxious, less able to deal with real life.
That example of Deborah Harrell, that mom arrested for letting her kid play alone in a park, was intense. Shows how extreme this can get.
It shows how distorted our idea of risk has become. What was normal a while ago is now seen as neglect.
It's like we don't trust each other anymore, not our communities, not even our own kids to handle themselves.
And that lack of trust, Haidt says, is a big driver of this safetyism, and it's changing how we raise kids. We're acting like being a kid is dangerous in itself.
Okay, so free play, safetyism, now social media, especially how it affects girls. Haidt spends the whole chapter on this, and the data is concerning.
Yeah, social media is linked to mental health stuff for everyone, but the research is pretty clear. Girls are getting hit harder.
Why is that? Why are girls more vulnerable?
Haidt talks about this thing called communion strivings. Basically, girls are, on average, more focused on relationships, connecting, fitting in.
So, they're more aware of social stuff, more sensitive to what others think.
Exactly. And social media, especially those image-based ones, they tap right into that. It's all connecting, sharing, looking for approval. But it's tricky because it also shows this distorted view of reality.
Right. Perfect profiles, filtered photos, showing only the good stuff. It's like a constant beauty contest. And the judges are your classmates. Your self-worth is on the line.
And remember, this is happening during adolescence when kids are already figuring out who they are, dealing with peer pressure. Social media just cranks that up.
He also talks about how focusing on how you look, which is everywhere online, that it can really hurt girls.
Right.
Body image problems, eating disorders, feeling not good enough. It's like adding fuel to a fire.
Yeah, and it makes us think about what messages girls are getting about themselves.
So we've talked about social media's effect on girls. What about boys? How are they affected by the digital world?
Boys have their own challenges. They don't have the same spike in depression as girls, but Haidt says their agency strivings, this desire for control, for mastery, often pulls them to video games.
So those games give them a space to be in control, achieve something, especially if they aren't getting that in real life.
Exactly. Nothing wrong with games in themselves, but too much can make them isolated, lose sleep, disconnected from the real world.
And he also brings up online porn, how that affects their development, their view of sex. It's like we're giving them this powerful tool, but no instructions, and they aren't emotionally ready.
And this is happening while we're also being overprotective, risk-averse. Boys aren't getting chances to, explore their masculinity, push their limits, learn about relationships in the real world.
It's like they're being pulled in two opposite directions, into this potentially harmful online world, while also being held back from real experiences they need to grow up healthy.
That's a great way to put it. And this takes us to another interesting part of Haidt's book, the spiritual side of all this.
Yeah, that caught me off guard. Spirituality in a book about mental health. How does that connect?
Haidt says the digital world, with all its distractions, its focus on me, is actually making us less spiritual. He calls it spiritual degradation. Basically, we're disconnected from the things that give us meaning, purpose, connection, transcendence.
He compares it to how religions have sacred times, places, objects. Like going to a church, it's set apart. But online, everything's mashed together, always available, pulling us away from right now.
Right. All that stimulation makes it hard to feel awe, to feel connected to something bigger, which is important for spiritual growth. He also talks about how social media keeps part of our brain, the default mode network, super active. We can't quiet our minds, connect to something deeper.
Like our brains are buzzing with thoughts about ourselves, our status, what people think. Makes it hard to just be still.
And he contrasts that with feeling awe, like when you're in the presence of something vast, mysterious. Awe can be a powerful antidote to anxiety, self-absorption, this spiritual decline. Remember that story about his student, Yi Mei, who found so much peace on an awe walk in nature?
Yes. It reminds us we don't need fancy stuff to experience the sacred. Sometimes it's just a walk in the woods. And Haidt also talks about being outdoors in general, how important that is. It's like we've forgotten we're part of nature, stuck inside on our screens.
Yeah, we're so disconnected, and that's part of this mental health issue. Especially for young people growing up in this tech-heavy world, they need those real experiences to fully develop, to thrive.
Okay, we've covered a lot. This great rewiring of childhood, the rise in mental health problems, social media, video games, even spirituality. It's a lot. But the good news is, Haidt offers solutions, not just problems.
That's right. In the next part, we'll explore what he calls for, what he thinks governments, tech companies, schools, and parents can actually do.
So stay tuned, because we're going to get practical, talking about how to build a world where young people can actually thrive online and off.
Welcome back. We've laid out the problem, so now let's look at what Haidt suggests we can actually do about all this. He really emphasizes that we can't just, sit around and watch while another generation struggles.
Yeah, I like how he gives specific steps, like, okay, here's the issue, now let's get to work fixing it.
And he's clear it's not about, hating on technology or wishing for the good old days before the internet. It's about using tech wisely, setting boundaries, making a world where young people can thrive online and off.
So where do we even begin? Who does Haidt think needs to step up?
He points to 4 groups: governments, tech companies, schools, and parents. Each one has a really important role in creating a healthier environment for kids.
Okay, let's take them one by one, starting with governments. What actions does Haidt want them to take?
He's big on regulating tech companies, especially when it comes to kids. He says right now, companies are basically free to exploit kids' attention, their data, and there's not enough oversight.
It's like the Wild West, but online. Just grab what you can, profits first, and who cares about the long-term effects?
Perfect analogy. Haidt says we need rules like we have for other industries that could harm people. We wouldn't let a company sell something that physically hurts kids, so why something that's mentally or emotionally harmful?
So what rules? What would those look like for the internet?
One big one is raising the age of internet adulthood. Right now it's 13. That's the COPPA law, for online privacy. But Haidt says that's way too young.
Yeah, 13, they're barely teenagers. Their brains are still forming. They're easily influenced, and they don't get the long-term consequences of what they do online. It's kind of crazy we just let them loose at that age.
Exactly. Haidt thinks it should be 16 at least, gives them more time to mature, make better choices online.
That makes sense. Give parents more time to guide them, set boundaries too. But wouldn't that be hard to do? Tech companies would push back, right? People who are all about online freedom.
Oh, for sure. It'd be a fight. But Haidt's point is kids' well-being has to come before profits or even privacy concerns. And he says we can do age verification without being too invasive, like using systems that don't need tons of personal data.
So it's possible, we just need to get creative and actually prioritize kids. Any other regulations he suggests?
Yeah, stricter age verification to keep kids off adult sites. Right now, it's too easy to lie about your age online. Click a button, you're in, no consequences.
And we're not talking about harmless stuff. It's adult content, gambling, things kids shouldn't see.
He thinks companies should have to do better age checks. Maybe using IDs, parental consent, something with more teeth, puts more responsibility on them to protect kids.
Okay, so raising the age limit, better age checks. Anything else on Haidt's list for governments?
He also says governments need to push back against this safetyism and actually give kids more chances to take risks, be independent in the real world.
Let kids be kids. That's almost a radical idea now, with all this worry about safety.
It is, but important. He thinks we need to rethink those laws that are too protective. The ones that stop kids from playing outside alone or doing things that might be a little risky but are age appropriate.
He mentions those reasonable childhood independence laws, right? The ones that say it's not neglect if you let your kid walk to school or play in the park unsupervised.
Exactly. Those are a good example of how laws can actually change what's considered normal, give kids more freedom.
But it's not just laws, right? It's also about having places where kids can be independent.
Right. We need more public spaces that are for kids. Playgrounds, parks, community centers, places where it's okay to run around, be loud, get messy, just be a kid.
It feels like we've designed everything for cars and adults and kind of forgotten about kids.
We need to reclaim some of that space for them. Okay, so governments, now tech companies. What's their role in all this?
I mean, they're kind of the problem, aren't they? So many platforms are designed to be addictive. That's how they make money. The more we scroll, the more data they get, the more ads they can show us.
You're not wrong. It's a conflict of interest built right in. And Haidt knows it's unrealistic to think they'll suddenly put users' well-being above profits.
So how do we change that? How do we get them to make stuff that's less addictive, less harmful?
Haidt thinks governments have to step in here, set standards for ethical design, especially for things marketed to kids.
So safety rules for the internet age.
Exactly. He proposes this duty of care idea, companies would be legally required to take steps to protect kids from harm when they design stuff. Same idea as with physical products, just applied to the digital world.
Makes sense. But what about those algorithms, those sneaky bits of code that keep us hooked? Can we regulate those?
He thinks so. Governments could require companies to be more open about how their algorithms work and give users more control over what they see. It's about giving people agency back.
Yeah, it's recognizing that these platforms really affect how we think, how we feel. We need to be more aware of how we're using them.
And he stresses that we need way more research on the long-term effects of social media, especially on young people, so we can make rules based on evidence. It's we're still figuring out how powerful this stuff really is. The early days of cigarettes, when we didn't fully get how bad they were for you.
That's a good point. We can't wait decades while another generation pays the price.
We got to be proactive.
Yeah.
Okay, we've done governments, tech companies, now schools. What can they do about all this?
Schools.
Haidt sees schools as like a key battleground. They can take steps to make the digital world less dominant and give kids more chances for free play, real-world learning, being social, more time outdoors, less time on the screens.
So less staring at phones, more interacting.
Right. And one of his most radical ideas is schools should be completely phone-free. No phones during the day at all.
Wow, that's bold. A lot of pushback from kids and parents, I bet.
It'd be a huge change. But his point is we need to make a real learning environment where kids can focus, be present, learn those social skills that phones are hurting.
It's about having a place away from all those distractions, that temptation to be online constantly. Just be in the moment without being glued to a device.
Exactly. And along with no phones, he wants schools to have more time for just free play, both inside and out. Longer recess, less structured activities.
Yeah, it's like we schedule every minute of kids' lives, control everything. We've forgotten how important it is to just let them play.
He also suggests this let grow project assignment. Kids go home and do something on their own they've never done before. Walk the dog, cook, run an errand.
I love that. It's encouraging independence for both the kid and the parent.
And parents realize their kids can do more than they thought. Builds trust. So no phones, more free play, assignments for independence, anything else for schools.
Yeah, anything else.
He talks a lot about recess, not just a break from class, but a time for kids to be social, learn to handle their emotions, get some exercise.
It feels like recess is becoming another structured thing, with rules for every game. What happened to just letting them figure it out?
Haidt says bring back the fun, the spontaneity, less adult interference, fewer rules. Trust kids to figure out their own games, their own social stuff.
And he's big on outdoor learning, connecting with nature. Sees nature as a remedy for all the stress of modern life.
Get them out of the classroom, into the woods, parks, gardens. Let them experience how amazing nature is. It taps into that deep connection we have to nature, which is often ignored in our tech-obsessed world.
Right, we've forgotten we're part of nature, not separate from it. And that separation is hurting us and the planet.
And it's especially important for kids who are growing up with so much tech, so many virtual experiences. They need those real-world sensory experiences.
Okay, we've covered a lot. Government regulations, what tech companies should do, the importance of play, nature, no phones in school. It's a big agenda, but it feels like we need big changes to face these big problems.
It is ambitious, but Haidt believes we can do it if we work together and actually make kids' well-being our priority. It's about realizing that the future depends on raising healthy, resilient kids. And that means changing some fundamental things about our society, how we use tech.
Okay, so now for the last piece. Parents. What about them?
Haidt gets that parents are under a ton of pressure these days. Conflicting advice everywhere, trying to balance work and family, worried about the future their kids are facing.
Yeah, it's like we're all doing our best in a world that keeps changing faster than we can keep up. Overwhelmed with information, feeling lost.
But he says parents have more power than they think. They can shape their kids' experiences, set good boundaries, teach them the skills and values they need to thrive in this world.
So what can parents actually do to raise healthy kids in this digital age? What advice does he give?
He has a lot of practical advice, and we'll get into some of his key recommendations in the last part of our deep dive.
Okay, welcome back to our deep dive into the anxious generation. We've talked about the challenges, what governments, tech companies, schools can do. But now, the most important part, parents.
Yeah, and we got to acknowledge, being a parent right now, it's tough. So much pressure, so much advice coming at you, and then your own worries about the world your kids are growing up in.
It's a lot. And after the last two parts of this, some parents might be feeling overwhelmed or even like guilty, thinking, am I doing this wrong? Is it too late to fix things?
It's natural to feel that way, but honestly, it's never too late to make good changes. And Haidt's not about blaming parents. He actually thinks they have more power than they realize to, shape their kids' lives, set boundaries, give them the tools they need to thrive.
So let's get into those specific things parents can do. Haidt talks about creating this play-based childhood, not a phone-based one. What does that actually look like?
It starts with something that seems basic, more unstructured time. Both inside and outside. Time to just play, explore, experiment, even get bored.
Bored. Isn't that what we're trying to avoid with all these screens and activities?
Haidt actually thinks boredom is good. It's where creativity comes from, imagination. If kids are always entertained, they don't develop those inner resources, that ability to, entertain themselves.
So just ditch the screens, let them run wild.
Not that simple. Safety matters, and every kid's different. You got to think about their age, their needs. But he's saying Push back a little against all this overprotection. Give them more freedom than they're used to.
It's about finding that balance, right?
Yeah.
Safe, but not too safe. Let them push their limits, but not be in actual danger.
Exactly. And that balance is different for each kid. Some are naturally more careful, others are daredevils. You know your kid best. Trust your gut. And as they show they can handle things, give them a little more leeway.
That makes sense. And speaking of showing them, Haidt says parents have to model good tech habits themselves. I know I catch myself on my phone way too much, even when my kids are around. It's like they just absorb that it's normal to be constantly plugged in.
We're the biggest influence on our kids, right? So yeah, actions speak louder than words. Want them to have a healthy relationship with tech. We got to show them what that looks like. Put the phone down, be present, actually engage with them.
So it's not just about less screen time. It's about being mindful of how we use tech, having those tech-free zones at home, showing them how to use it intentionally, not just mindlessly.
Exactly. And one big thing, delay smartphones as long as you can. Haidt's pretty firm on that. Ideally, no smartphones till high school.
I can imagine that's a tough sell for a lot of parents. There's so much pressure, the whole everyone else has one argument.
It's hard, but important. He says those preteen, early teen years are crucial for brain development, social and emotional stuff. Too much screen time then can have consequences later.
It's like giving them a Ferrari before they can even ride a bike. Too much power, not enough maturity to handle it.
And it's not just the harm it can do, it's what they're missing. All that time online is time they could be exploring, connecting with real people, finding what they're passionate about, just enjoying being a kid.
So resist the pressure, parents. It's worth the fight to delay that smartphone.
It is. And you're not alone. Talk to other parents, build a support system, push for change in your community. The more parents who resist this whole overprotection, screen time overload thing, the better it'll be for all kids.
Haidt also talks about connecting with nature, getting kids outside, hiking, exploring, playing in the dirt.
Nature's like a reset button for all this stress and anxiety. It's a place to slow down, use your senses, feel connected to something bigger.
And it doesn't have to be some big elaborate trip, a walk in the park, a picnic in the backyard. It all counts.
It's about making it a regular part of life. Build it into your routine, let them explore, let them get dirty, let them be amazed by nature.
And lastly, he talks about helping kids find meaning, purpose, connecting to something bigger than themselves, whether it's religion, helping others, some cause they're passionate about.
It's about helping them find their place in the world, feeling like they belong, having hope for the future.
It's that God-shaped hole, as he calls it, that need for something more, something that gives meaning to life.
And that's so important for young people now in a world that can feel so chaotic, so uncertain.
So how do we help them find that meaning? Where do we even start?
Honestly, start by listening to them. Understand what they value, support what they're interested in. Give them chances to try things out, connect with their community, make a difference, even if it's small.
It's about empowering them to make the world a better place, to believe that they can make a difference.
That's really what Haidt's all about, empowering young people to create a better future for themselves and for everyone.
That's a great note to end on. We've gone deep on this one, from the problems to the solutions, from big societal changes to what we can do as individuals. I hope you're leaving this feeling informed, inspired, and maybe a little bit more hopeful.
The point is, we're not helpless. We have choices. We can work together to make a better world for these kids. It starts with understanding and then taking action.
So what really stuck with you? What will you do differently? What questions are you still thinking about? Keep those thoughts going. That's what the deep dive is all about. Thanks for joining us.